This story starts back a few months ago when I noticed that there was a service requirement to this class. Groaning, I started searching for the closest facility that I could find, and figured that I could get through the 10 hours and just be done with it all. I remembered my early childhood trip to a nursing home to see my great-grandmother. I remember being terrified because all the residents seemed like they were in such pain. Everyone was groaning. I looked into the wrong room and saw an elderly lady just staring at the ceiling while letting out groans. One elderly woman who, looking back now, was probably a former smoker than a killer robot, spoke to me with a device that makes people sound kind of robotic, I guess, and I ended up crying. Now, I'm sure over the years that my mind had made these experiences seem worse than they really were. Still, I knew that regardless of prior misconceptions, I still had to do the 10 hours regardless. So figuring that all of them were more or less the same, I chose the closest place I could find on the list provided to us at the beginning of the class, which happened to be Wesley Court Assisted Living. So once I had picked a place, it was time to do some visiting and paperwork. I got there at lunchtime, which was probably a mistake considering that meant everyone was pretty much busy eating, and the lunchroom was pretty quiet as if people weren't enjoying their meal or anything, which made me worry that my previous misconceptions about how miserable these places are weren't really misconceptions. After spending 20 minutes to find someone to help me find the activity director, I managed to accidentally run into her. We squared away a schedule and duties that I'd be participating in, but a lot of what she wanted me to do was simply talk with the residents and participate in any events they had going on at the time. On my way out, a resident approached me, going on about how she didn't want to go to bed yet, which I thought was kind of weird that she was being forced to go to bed at such an odd hour, and worried even more about my detestation for these facilities and how miserable they made their residents. Later I found out that she had dementia and had wanted to take a nap, only for her to find out, or forget, that she had wanted to by the time they got rolled to her room, and she assumed that the workers were trying to make her go to bed. But I left that day even more convinced that I was right in my assumptions. The second time I went back, on the first day of actual volunteering, I went in at a different time to avoid the busyness of lunch. My dread hadn't subsided quite yet, but it did when I arrived that day. Since everyone wasn't eating this time, the residents were actually doing stuff. I got there and was greeted by the puppy of a resident that lived there. After spending an embarrassing amount of time playing with the dog, before checking in to start my hours, I made my way to the entrance. There were residents sitting in the warmth, talking and laughing. There were a few that were taking walks on the sidewalk. Inside, people were having their hair done. A man was playing the piano for some residents. Others were playing cards, or games, or just watching TV. The residents seemed to be making the best of it in all honesty, and even enjoying their time there. This is when I started to notice that assisted living facilities often focus on more emotional aging instead of kind of the medical aging that I saw in my time at the nursing home. For my actual volunteering that day, I helped the activity director set up the group room for some event they were doing later. While doing that, I visited with residents that were passing by. One of them asked what I went to school for, which was education, and the activity director overheard. Before I knew it, she had come up with this idea that I do a lesson for the male residents of the facility. No idea what I was going to do a lesson on for these guys, but being put on the spot had a funny way of making me a little bit more malleable to requests. I spent days dreading teaching whatever lesson this lady expected from me. I could have gone over the stuff they experienced in their lifetimes, but what could I teach them that they didn't experience for themselves, or would even care about? In the end, I decided that the answer was nothing, so I didn't teach them. Instead, I let them teach me. I used the time that the director gave me to have this group session to interview them. I talked with them about a bunch of subjects, even about their time in the assisted living community. It provided me a lot of insight into what assisted living facilities are really like, even how they differ from the nursing homes that I visited in my childhood. I also got the opportunity to humanize them in my eyes, I guess. Like I said earlier, I thought older adult facilities were just full of miserable residents that were waiting to die. But this ended up not being the case, as I saw that many of these people led happy and fulfilling lives, and even liked where they are now. After that ended, I talked with the activities director about some of the residents in there, scheduled my next visit, and left. An odd thing happened on my next visit. I couldn't find the activities director, and she had not assigned me anything to do prior. I ended up finding myself in the common room while waiting on her, and that was when a Bible study group walked in. Not being particularly religious, but not also wanting to be rude. I tried excusing myself politely, but the person in charge of it insisted I stay and participate. She had me participate in the questions and the kind of interpretations that they wanted to talk about that week, and also pass out some of the candy and snacks for the residents. It really wasn't all that bad. The resident that knew that I was an education major, was there and told everyone, and another colorful lady told me that I needed to be sure that I was bringing God back into schools. A lot of the residents really got into the Bible study. It wasn't a dry old sermon that you see half the congregation sleeping through, but something that the residents seemed to really enjoy. And it was pretty populated in that room by the end, and most of the residents in the facility were there. It was interesting to see how religious older generations are, which is something that is also discussed in the book, I believe. Because my generation isn't all that religious, or if they are, it really isn't a point of conversation or shown openly because of how, I guess, kind of confrontational a lot of people are over the subject. I eventually found the activities director, but she had nothing for me, and that I had already spent enough time helping out with the Bible study for her to count me as volunteering. The next week I spent a decent amount of time with personally visiting a specific resident that I was assigned to named Bob. He was also at the Bible study, by the way. Bob's family didn't visit very often, and being a male resident in a female-dominated facility can get kind of lonely, apparently, when it comes to at least same-sex interaction. I visited with Bob and noticed that he too was also really religious, and even had a extremely old Bible, well over a century or two old. I thought it was a really interesting piece, just having an interest in history. It was something that, I don't know, I thought it was a very cool thing to show people. He also had a fascination with Japanese culture and had a lot of kind of artifacts from that culture laying about his room and arranged as, decorum. And he had led a very extensive life traveling the world, either with the military or with the money he made from his own business ventures, I guess. When I left that day, I almost had all my hours complete. The old me would be ecstatic, but now I found myself feeling a little disappointed that I wouldn't have to come see Bob or the puppy, or any of the old Bible study people anymore. My last required day was when I volunteered to help out with the trunk or treat event that the assisted living facility had going on. In addition to passing out candy, I arrived early enough to help the workers set up the games they had planned for the kids that would be coming for candy, and also I had enough time to decorate my trunk. The residents came out and passed out candy to the kids that came by. They also coordinated some of the games. I noticed Bob was wandering around, and I eventually managed to find him, and he spent some time passing out candy with the kids with me. There was a really big turnout. Everyone was enjoying themselves, and the residents were especially enjoying all the little kids that came through and all the social interaction that they got to participate in. A lot of their families even came to help out in the event. It was just a fun time, really. I stayed after and helped put the games and various tables up before telling the activities director this would be my last required day. Said our well wishes and eventually left. While I know that it is obvious that there's nothing actually stopping me from just continuing my volunteering there after seeing multiple references to regret about being done volunteering now, I'm afraid that my senior seminar and my student teaching is going to keep me too busy to continue it regularly for the remainder of my college career. I'm sad that it took me 21 years to realize that I was wrong about all my misconceptions about older adult facilities and their residents. I had become convinced that older adult facilities were just where you went to die, and now that I've spent a lot of time in an assisted living facility as opposed to the obviously not very efficiently run nursing home that my great grandmother was apparently in, that adults can actively age, or older adults can actively age in these facilities, and that it's really not as bad as I made it out to be when I was, 8 or 9 years old. So in conclusion, I let one bad experience almost ruin the chance at a fulfilling volunteer service and learning experience. Maybe I'll find some time to volunteer at another facility once I've graduated. A large part of our grade for this is making a course connection, and I think I noticed 3 major course connections. The first being obviously what assisted living facilities are. The book notes the different types of older adult care that many older adults will receive and the differences and similarities between them. And before, I'd only been to nursing homes, so I kind of assumed that they were all the same from that. But assisted living facilities obviously focus more on the emotional and social well-being of the aging process instead of the medical, because most of their residents are more healthy and able to live slightly more independent lives. The second thing I saw was kind of Erik Erikson's stages of development. A lot of the residents had succeeded in passing all these stages and were able to live their life to the fullest as a result of it. Others in the facility still hadn't